It's pretty chilly in here. I should have worn a jacket. What's the weather like today? Hmm. Wow, it's 32 degrees. That's the freezing point. I'm surprised it didn't even snow yet. Well, that's pretty cold. But you know what's even colder? Absolute zero. Well, what is absolute zero? You may not have heard of it, and it's a really cool thing. It's the coldest temperature ever possible. But what exactly is absolute zero, and what weird things happen when something reaches absolute zero? And has this absolute zero coldest temperature ever been reached? Well, in this episode, I want to take you behind the science of absolute zero and tell you more about this amazing science and some of the weird stuff that happens if something were to theoretically reach absolute zero. Let's go! So, what exactly is absolute zero? Well, absolute zero, as the name suggests, is the coldest temperature ever possible. And it is 0 degrees Kelvin. Kelvin is a unit of measurement that scientists use to measure temperature. And that 0 degrees Kelvin is roughly negative 273.15 degrees Celsius or negative 459.67 degrees Fahrenheit. I know that is really, really cold. It's much colder than the 32 degrees that's outside. Well, that's super, super cold. And fun fact, we have never reached absolute zero before. Now, what makes absolute zero so special? Well, it's the theoretical point where you can't get any colder. And what exactly happens to absolute when something reaches absolute zero? Well, to find that out, we got to go into the science of heat. You see, heat is caused by the movement of atoms inside a substance. That's called thermal energy. The faster the atoms inside the substance move, the hotter it gets, and the slower it moves, the colder it gets. And that's because the energy gets reduced when the temperature drops, and the energy increases when the temperature goes up. Now, what does that have to do with absolute zero? Well, when things naturally get colder, they get closer to each other and they start moving much more slower than they already are. So when absolute zero occurs, and remember, we have never ever reached absolute zero, and absolute zero is just a theoretical point. Well, when something reaches absolute zero, scientists think it'll completely stop moving or won't even move that much. And the atoms inside, if you were to zoom into the atoms inside of some substance, you would see that the atoms don't even move at all because of absolute zero. And this absolute zero, everything just stops. That's it. It just freezes, and it literally freezes at that point. If it gets below or at that point or 0 degrees Kelvin, that's it. Everything just freezes. And that's because that temperature is so cold that nothing can stay in that. Not even the atoms can start moving in that. And that's what makes it so cool. That's why such weird things happen when we experience absolute zero. There's still some mysteries on absolute zero and what happens, and that's because scientists won't be able to replicate the conditions of absolute zero in a lab. That's because it takes so much energy to take all that energy out of the substance to bring it to absolute zero. So it is physically impossible with the technologies that we have right now to get something to absolute zero. And nothing that we know of on Earth or even in space has ever gone to absolute zero. So we're kind of in the mystery right here. What we know right now is all thanks to the theories of scientists. And this absolute zero is a really, really mind blowing thing. But there's so much to know about it in the future. Maybe you could be the scientist that discovers how to get to absolute zero. That would be a lot of fun. Well, let's review what we learned in this episode. Maybe I'll try to make a little machine that can get us to absolute zero. I should try, but I don't think it's gonna work. Anyway, let's get right into reviewing. What did we learn in this episode? In this episode, we learned that absolute zero is the coldest temperature ever possible. It's a theoretical limit of temperature. And remember, no one has ever reached absolute zero. When absolute zero occurs, all the atoms that are inside of an object just stop moving because there's no energy for them to move and it's so cold. It's over negative 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And obviously no one has reached that because it's kind of hard to replicate those conditions in a lab. But it's really interesting to think about, and hopefully in the future scientists will be able to reach absolute zero and learn more about this amazing phenomenon. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Spectacular Science. Spectacular Science produced and hosted by me, Akshay J. Raman. Our theme song and additional music are by Chan Ramachandran. Please visit my podcast website, spectacularsci.com, to find interactive activities, articles, and blog posts. That's spectacularsci.com. Do you have a science question that you want answered on a Spectacular Science episode and get a special shout out? Well, head over to spectacularsci.com/contact and grab a parent to send me your amazing science questions that I may feature on an upcoming Spectacular Science episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening right now. It really encourages me, and you'll be up to date on all the new episodes. Subscribe and share this podcast with your friends and family. Subscribe on YouTube so you can get us one subscriber close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers by the end of 2024. Let's do this. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Spectacular Science next week. Keep thinking about science.